Okay, so this is my attempt at a review on the Aero. It's important to know where I'm coming from on this. I've had a valve index for the last 3.5 years. The valve index is a very comfortable headset. The off-ear headphones are fantastic. The tracking is fantastic. I like the index controllers. The interface is really easy to swap out. Really, I mean, if it wasn't for the resolution, I'd still be using the index. It has just, it's been a great little workhorse for me. And it has a cute little frunk with the USB connector, and I even had gotten a Leap Motion controller that would fit right in there for hand tracking. Still haven't figured out how I want to make that work for the Aero. So the elephant in the room is the computer. If you want to drive an Aero well, you need power. This is a 13900K CPU with a 4090 GPU, and I almost don't think that this headset, anything lower than that won't work that well for many things. It really requires a lot of power, and it can use every last bit of both the CPU and the GPU depending on the title that you're in. So you have to feed it very well if you want it to work well. So compared with the index, you have to deal with the audio solution for it as well. And I did some testing on a few things. I tried some over-the-head cans. These are Sennheiser 569s. And I got them specifically because they had a little bitty microphone. And so they've got a four-pole connector, so they have stereo and microphone. And they work okay. It's obviously an inconvenience to deal with a headset versus just putting them on and setting them up and then going. I ended up going the route of an IEM, so and I still wanted a microphone, so I got a Camaro Grandma boom mic. So when the headset is in, it sits right here with a boom on it, and it works beautifully. It has a lot of rejection. I was getting over 40 decibels of rejection. I was not picking up a lot of loud noises from my rig. You could hear it, but it was way down. And use of a mic like this will work perfectly with any form of voice activated controls or just talking with people in game. They're not going to be overwhelmed by all the noise they're hearing from your rig. I mean, the G belt, which is pulling right behind my head, I could barely hear that at the very bottom. You could barely hear a little transducer. You could hear the actuator. Really, you have to crank the volume up very high so they won't be distracting in game. So this is a good audio solution. It works well. It's still more cumbersome, but it's workable. The thing about the Aero where it does actually stand out from the index, before we deal with displays and so forth, is the comfort factor. The way this is set up, and you probably heard the ratcheting sounds, it doesn't have that smooth hinge like the valve index does, but it does have the ability to adjust how the facial interface fits. So you can adjust it, how hard it's pushing on your cheeks, and how hard it's pushing on your forehead. So you can, and you don't need to put as much, you don't have to make it nearly as tight because you've got this overhead adjustment that you can ratchet up and adjust down to get your eye level where it needs to be. So from a comfort standpoint, it really does work well. You don't need much pressure on your face at all, so it's not gonna make you or pushing on your face hard at all. Even compared to the index, which I thought fit very well, I can wear this for a longer, more extended period of time without any issues. Now, with regard to the interface, it uses Velcro. So they sent me one with indentations for wider glasses. It's not as convenient to replace as the magnetic index is, but the upside is that it's not porous. So the with the index, they could get saturated with sweat pretty easily, and I actually had some friends over, and I have 3 interfaces, and they had their names on them. This one had a name, and this was the one I was wearing that didn't have a name. And that's a nice thing. On the Aero, you can wipe it down between users, and it won't soak up the sweat. So that's it's an upside, I guess, if you consider this comfortable. And once again, because you're not having to clamp it down as hard to hold things in place, the fact that it's not quite as soft as this material, it becomes a moot point. So it is easier to work with in that respect. The other thing it does when you first put it on is it does do the automatic IPD adjustment. So it tracks your eyes. You have to look at a little circle. It turns white and green and moves around a little bit, and then it hooks up your IPD. You can leave it on so that it does it every time you put a headset on, which can be a little irritating if you take it on and off and on and off. Every single time you put it on, it would have you hit the button and calibrate. You can also have it remember your calibration so that when you put it on and off, it'll do it like once in a great while, but not frequently. The other thing about the calibration that's interesting is it'll tell you if you have it on your face properly. It'll tell you that you need to, for example, drop the headset lower on your face in order to be centered properly in the lenses. So that's kind of a nice feature. I don't have any real issues with this from an ergonomic standpoint. It's comfortable. In room scale games, it's a little heavier, but because of how it rests on your head, the only time you really notice it is when you aren't using the, you can see it's a very wide support across the back and the front or top of your head. If you tilt it way down or way up, then this isn't providing any support. But especially in Sims, it's not an issue, and it feels good. The other thing I've run into is it has cooling fans. Now, the cooling fans are great in that I have no fog issues while the fans are running. When you first turn on your system, you'll see the fans they'll kick on momentarily and then they turn off, and they don't come on except to cool the system. So it may be 10 minutes before they come on. So if you just flip your computer on, throw the headset on, and start playing, say, a room scale game, it might start getting foggy for you. But once it warms up, that's not an issue. So I haven't found I have to run the fan on my rig in order to keep air going through it so I don't have fogged lenses. So that works out real well. The index controllers were real easy to set up. I mean, part of the, you install the base software with the Aero. You have to bind the controllers. It takes a few seconds to bind each one, and then they work just like they did with the Valve Index. I'm a fan of these. I'm very happy with these index controllers. They'll be going into their 4th year, and I've given them some good use. At any rate, so I am using 2 base stations. I've had them set up since I initially set up my Valve Index, and so I've got one in the back of the room that's up high in the air. I guess it's 6.5 feet in the air, and I've got one right behind me in this corner, and I've had no tracking issues. It doesn't matter if I'm in rally and my rig's bouncing me around or anything. I've not had no problems at all. It's worked perfectly. I had heard that the Aero is a little more susceptible to EMI, and even though my D-Box Gen 5, SC2 Pro, and G-Belt appear to be very well EMI they appear to be shielded well. I've not had any issues with my index before, so I didn't expect to have it. But I went ahead and put on these ferrite cores. I've got one on the USB cable going from the Aero into the back of the computer, and I've got the other one going from the USB cord that comes out of my 10-port USB hub on the rig. That was probably just being a little overly careful. So the whole IEM thing is something new for me. I've never been a fan of headphones. I really like the index off-ear speakers. They do have a nice spatial feel to them. They have good bass, and they're very solid. I initially tried out some Shure 215s, which work well. They're about $100 a pair, and the set I got actually has a little built-in condenser mic, so you could use that by itself. This is a much higher quality microphone though, and it does work better. You can use the same type. These are the same connectors, so I could put these on the if I can get this to pop off. There we go. These are, what is it, MCXX or something to that effect, but you can interchange them, and the Shure IEMs fit right, at least for me anyway, fit right inside my ears very, very comfortably, so I've been real happy with that. I did end up going a little bit overkill on the headphones probably, and I'm not saying these are the best out there. I ended up with some Shure 846s, Gen 2s, and I've left the red filter in place, which allows the highs to be extended. Compared to the index, there is a little more fidelity. I'm hearing some things I didn't notice quite as much, but it's really close, and these are very expensive headphones, so I mean, the 215s have solid enough bass and seem to work pretty well. I have trouble recommending that amount of money, but it worked well for me, so I'm sticking with them for now since I've got them. All right, so let's get to the actual the display itself. So the big things that you hear from people are that it doesn't have a field of view that would make you happy. And surprisingly, I've not found that to be the case. As I said, I've really enjoyed my valve index. I went from a Rift CV1 to the valve index. For about a month, I tried out a Reverb G2. The Reverb G2 had a very small in-focus area. You could 3D print a Franken FOV insert and then buy an interface pad for it, and that would improve your field of view to make it better, but I never got on with the Windows Mixed Reality environment with pairing the index controllers to the G2's controllers. There were a few things, and I won't get into that. A lot of people love the G2. It's a great, inexpensive headphone or set of VR headset that it does a great job for the money. I mean, it goes on sale sometimes as low as $299, and that's a hell of a lot of bang for the buck. So I'm not, if you've got a G2 and you're happy with it, that's great. I'm not trying to push anyone in any directions. So the field of view on this may not be as large as the index, but it's so clear and sharp that you kind of lose yourself in it. You find your eyes looking around. You don't have to move your head as much as you would in, say, a G2. And I have not been disappointed. I wouldn't, in room scale, I wouldn't mind having more vertical field of view. In some flying games, it might be nice to see a little more of the cockpit when you're looking out, but it isn't bothering me. I thought it might, it didn't, and I'm happy with that. Now, in terms of what I started out with saying how you need a pretty powerful computer to drive it, the fidelity that you get is going to vary dramatically from title to title. So for starters, I'm currently only running the 35 ppd, and that in order to do that, you have to set it to the when you're in the base, you set it to is it 37 or 39 ppd. It's the highest setting that you can. And then if you're not using software that was made using the Varjo SDK toolkit, it'll automatically drop you down to 35 ppd if you pick the highest. So in iRacing, I can actually get a solid 90 frames per second with a full grid of cars. The GPU is at maybe 65%, and I'm getting a very solid 90 frames per second running this thing at 35 ppd, and it does look excellent. I have to pull a few settings back, and the only time I've seen it drop below that was I was in an AI race. I caused a pile up in a corner, and looking around at a grid full of cars crashing into each other, it dropped down to like 86 frames per second. Not a big deal. And then it went right back up into, staying at 90 very solidly. So in iRacing, that worked real well. When you start getting into flying games, this gets interesting, because in a flying game, it's typically okay to deal with the lower refresh rate, but some of these headsets don't handle well if you're at a different frequency than the refresh rate that's native to the display. The Aero will handle a lot of different frame rates really well. It is surprising to me, because I could be in DCS or in Microsoft Flight Simulator and have the frames per second drop down to 60, 65, or 70 or whatever, and it still looked smooth. There's no stuttering. It handled the lower frame rates really well. So that's the upside. If you're in one of those games, you can lower. It's lowering the frame rate because it's not keeping up, and you'll find your 4090 in this case is running 93, 95% or something, and you're getting mid 70s. So it's running close to flat out. The CPU's typically in DCS, it's pretty much not pegged, but it's maxed out pretty high. It's close. Now the other thing is that they're still working on new software. Varjo's working on motion smoothing software, and I've seen some videos where people are running at just 30 frames per second, but they're getting a smooth view, and they're saying it's like butter and all those other adjectives. I've not tried it out yet. It's still experimental, but it's coming. So that's where you start running into the limitations of the hardware / software, because they keep coming out with improvements to the software. There's very active software development going. And I saw very recently, in 2023, they had an update. NVIDIA put out an update where people were saying they were getting an extra 2 or 3 frames per second in the flight sims because of improvements in efficiency at the device driver level. And then there's OpenXR. Right now, when I'm running iRacing, I'm running it with eye tracking foveated rendering, or dynamic foveated rendering, which would be an ideal situation. And I've got it culling outside of the area I can see, so it doesn't bother to render the pixels that, when I'm not looking at an area, I wouldn't see. And it shows up as an interesting artifact on the screen. So if you've got full screen in iRacing and you're running the dynamic foveated rendering, you'll see a curved pixelated thing on the corners of the screen. You can tell it's just not rendering those pixels, not for the screen and not for your headset. And that's great, but there is not dynamic foveated rendering support in many titles. I think there's 2 or 3 right now. There's a work in progress. So it becomes complex in terms of you've got the NVIDIA drivers, and the Aero only supports NVIDIA, so it doesn't handle AMD GPUs at all, so that's why I'm focusing on that. Then you've got the XRM toolbox, and then you've got the base software that Varjo's coming out with that has, it allows you to select your resolutions, says which version of Open, if it's going to do OpenVR or OpenXR, you've got switches for that sort of thing. But they're going to have motion smoothing coming out, and they've got additional capabilities. So And if you were going to take a worst case scenario, like let's say ACC, I haven't tried it yet. I can only imagine that the frame rates would suffer since it's not very well optimized. So the fact that I'm able to actually get 90 frames per second with iRacing is more a fortunate situation, that iRacing is a very efficient title, and it has foveated rendering working with it, and on the Discord server for the Varjo users, there have been people who had worked through and told me, here are the settings that you do inside of your NVIDIA control center, and then here are your XR settings, and then here's how you your graphic settings inside of iRacing, and if you put all these numbers together, you actually get great performance. Like I said, it's a work in progress. So I'm happy with this, and I will be using this in place of my index until something better comes out. I would still like to see off-ear headphones again. I'm still very excited to see whatever Valve comes out with for their next headset. I would love to have more field of view as well, but this is working well for now. I am transitioning to the IEMs pretty well, and they do sound good, and the boom works well, so I've got a good microphone, so it's a workable solution. I assume that Varjo is going to be coming out with some kind of some update at some point, but who knows where. And so right now there's a number of other headsets that are on the market. I know that Pimax is supposed to be releasing their Crystal at some point in the future, and I had somebody pointing out that, well, the Crystal has a very similar number of pixels to the Aero, and then someone else astutely pointed out the issue is when you have a larger field of view that you have to render more polygons. It's not just the resolution, it's what's in your field of view. So my guess is that unless the Pimax base software is more advanced than what Varjo has, that the Crystal is going to have similar or slightly lower performance to what the Aero has right now. So that's just something to be aware of. If you're not sporting a 4090 and latest CPU, I don't know how well that's going to fly. It may be a situation where you're a GPU generation away from things working smoothly. The other option, though, is running it at lower resolution. And like I said, for most titles, I'm running this at 27 ppd. So it's not the full potential of what the headset has. So, in conclusion, this thing has a lot of strengths, has a few weaknesses. I don't consider it an endgame headset in that I do eventually want a wider field of view. Some people are still wanting the absolute blacks. I found the color on this is good, and I'm happy with it. The off-ear speaker versus IEM is a mixed call. I found the IEMs are they're a little cumbersome, but I'm getting very comfortable putting them on and off. I find the boom makes it easier for me to figure out which is the right ear and which is the left ear. The comply inserts, like the foam inserts that came with these, have an attenuation factor where they mask the sound of your rig, but likewise mask the sound of your wife hollering down the stairs. If you have small children around, this kind of sound isolation may not be a good fit for you. It's working well for me, and the upside is I can't hear my rig. I can hear the in-game sound. It's very immersive, and it works well. So in that sense, it's working very well. I don't find that I'm missing the additional field of view that my Index had, because there's so much screen real estate to look at that's sharp, and there's just so many details that I'm seeing. So I don't know that I can recommend this to anybody because of the price, especially considering, I mean, I upgraded to a 13900K or an i9, whatever, the latest Intel CPU and the 4090 and the headset. And then I had to get an audio solution for it. And all in, that was a chunk of change. So this is an enthusiast headset for somebody who understands that when they try to make it work for a given title, there will be tweaking involved at multiple levels. So you'll have your in-game graphics settings, you'll have your XRM, or your OpenXR toolkit settings, and then you'll have your NVIDIA settings. And the performance is going to depend on the evolution of the Varjo base software, the NVIDIA driver software, the OpenXR software, and what the developers are doing for the titles. So there's a lot of dependencies on how much of the capacity of this that you can unleash. So if you understand that going in with your eyes open, it is quite a headset. And based on what I'm seeing from how well the latest, greatest hardware can push this, I'm less optimistic that it will be able to drive, say, a Pimax Crystal as well, even if they have similar resolution, because at a wider field of view, there's more polygons to render, and the GPU is going to have a harder workload. And if I can only get one one sim title, being iRacing right now, to run at 35 ppd and give me 90 frames per second, that says something. I mean, that is an efficient title for VR. It makes me think, ACC is pretty much out of limits for both this and the upcoming Crystal. The flight games, it does depend on reprojection, motion smoothing, and other things. And it looks like Varjo I might be able to get up to 35 ppd at some point in either Microsoft Flight Simulator, probably in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and maybe in DCS, if I'm willing to deal with the frame rate cut. And since the Aero does display lower frame rates smoothly without any stuttering, that is an option if you're comfortable with it. People have different comfort levels with different frame rates, so there are a lot of variables here.